Right, let's get going. So welcome everyone to this Road Safety GB Data Analyst Network webinar. Today we are joined by two colleagues from Transport for London, and they're going to do a presentation in two parts, as you can see on the screen, talking a bit about their new action plan and then a bit around driving and riding for work and some of their work-related risk analysis that they've been doing. As usual, please do use the chat and the Q&A throughout this webinar. Any questions, please put them in the Q&A, then it's easier for me to see where they all are together. And we'll have maybe 15-20 minutes at the end to ask Stephen and Hannah from TfL your questions then. Any general chat about the webinar, please do use the chat function as we go as well. Okay, right, I'll hand over to you guys.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As was just said, we're going to give a presentation in two parts. The first bit will focus a little bit on what road danger looks like in London and our new Vision Zero action plan. And then the second part is really exciting. We'll talk a little bit about a piece of work we did to better understand what work-related road risk looks like in London. Right, so I'm just going to start with the Vision Zero action plan. So most of you probably know, but in London we are working towards Vision Zero. The Mayor has set us a really ambitious target of eliminating death and serious injury from London's roads by 2041. And really, like Vision Zero is sort of based in the firm belief that it is neither inevitable nor acceptable for anybody to be killed or seriously hurt while they're traveling around the city. We're trying, so in order to deliver this, we have adopted the internationally acclaimed sort of safe systems approach. It consists of 5 pillars. Sorry, I jumped ahead. The safe systems approach is really based on 3 sort of main assumptions. First of all, people will make mistakes. You can't get rid of that. Second, the body really has a strict kind of threshold for what it can, what kind of impact it can sustain before sort of fatal injury occurs. And third, there's a collective responsibility for road safety. Anybody who has a role in designing, building, operating, maintaining, etc., the roads has a responsibility for safety and has to look after everybody else. So to accommodate this, then the safe systems approach basically builds up a system, sort of like, I guess, layers of cheese, like Swiss cheeses puts in place that of controls. That means if somebody does make a mistake, or if a collision does occur, it doesn't have to be fatal and it doesn't have to be the most severe outcome. The safe systems approach consists of the 5 pillars. So first of all, safe speeds. That is really making sure that the speeds are appropriate for a busy, populated city. Second, safe streets. That we are designing infrastructure with safety as a priority and really like addressing high-risk locations and making sure that if people do make a mistake, for example, at a junction or whatever, it doesn't lead to death. Then safe vehicles, and that is around addressing the risk from like the most dangerous vehicles out on the roads. So, for example, we've brought in the direct vision standard, the bus safety standard, etc. And safe behaviors, and that is reducing the likelihood of people making mistakes, or the likelihood of people behaving in a way that puts themselves at risk or others. And then lastly, post-collision learning and criminal justice. That's really making sure that we're sharing, that we're understanding why things happen, that we're sharing that knowledge, and that we're making sure it doesn't happen again, but also to make sure that people, that the criminal justice system is appropriate for what is happening. And so Vision Zero is something that the Mayor has tasked us with, and us is TfL, the MPS, so the Metropolitan Police, and the London Boroughs, and we're sort of a delivery team and trying to deliver this together. But like I said, everybody else who sort of travels and works in London, uses the road network, also has a responsibility for it. Then sort of before moving on, it's really important to sort of make the point that Vision Zero really is more than a safety program. It is a safety program for sure, but also it is absolutely key for sort of realizing the mayor's wider ambition for creating a greener, safer, and sort of more inclusive city and a place where people want to be. And that is really because we know that a lot of that risk from motor vehicles is often cited as a reason by people to choose not to walk or to cycle or in fact to take the bus or the tube. So then it follows, if you reduce road danger and you make the roads safer, more people will choose active travel and public transport. And then you further reduce reliance on car journey, which makes the roads safer again. And then you're sort of sparking a kind of virtuous cycle in this. And as you see more people using sustainable modes and walking, cycling, then you're also unlocking loads of other benefits for the city. So you're improving the air quality, you have reduced carbon emissions, you are seeing sort of a reduction in chronic illness and improvement in public health, but also you're addressing like long-standing problems in the city, such as congestion, etc. So Vision Zero is really at the heart of something. It sparks really good things, and it's really, really central to creating a city in which we all want to live and like being. So then in terms of road danger reduction, so we published the first Vision Zero action plan back in 2018 and have been really busy since then, delivering a lot of programs, etc., under each of the pillars. And what we've done has really worked. So we have seen a 24% reduction in people killed or seriously injured compared to our 2010-2014 baseline, and that is in front of a backdrop of a 13% reduction nationally. So it really shows that if you have an ambitious program and you're really committed to that, you can really achieve great progress. And we're really proud of that. Also, if you look at London and compare it to other cities, it also shows that we're doing really well. So London are the green bits here, and this is traffic death per 100,000 daytime population. And you can see if you're comparing us to comparable cities like Paris or New York or whatever, we're ahead of them. And then in terms of fatalities, we have also seen a steady reduction in fatalities. And what is really, we sort of try to work backwards from where we are now to when we started. And we estimate that in that time, we've saved approximately 250 lives in London. So that's 250 people who are now alive, who might not have been had we not taken action. And if you think 250 sounds like a lot, this is sort of what 250 people look like. This is really, we took a picture of our colleagues on this, and this is like 250 faces, people, families, networks of colleagues and friends, etc., who have been spared the harm from road danger. But also, just to sort of stress, 250 people is a lot, but it's likely a massive sort of underestimate, because some of the actions we're taking in London have sort of more wide-ranging ripple effects. For example, the direct vision standard for HGVs in London, these vehicles don't just drive in London, they also travel around the rest of the country, and lives will be saved there then too. So it really is incredibly motivating, I think, and something to be really proud of. If you're looking at who is being killed or seriously injured in London, so the vast majority of people, 80%, are either walking, cycling, or motorcycling. So these are the people who are not protected by a metal box, essentially. And if you look at crossroads, we've really made great progress across all modes. I'm seeing reduction in people being killed or seriously injured, with the exception of cycling, where you will see a 7% increase. And that's not good, but it's also important to sort of see it in the context of, we've seen an absolute explosion in cycling journeys in London. We've seen a 30% increase since 2010, 2014. So whereas the absolute numbers have gone up, in actual fact, cycling has become safer, and we've seen a 23% reduction in risk in cycling. So it's important to remember that. Then who is causing the harm? Well, 60% of people are killed or seriously injured in a collision with a car in London. And that is proportionate of the mode share. So there's many cars around, and that is why many people are killed or seriously injured by cars. And then you can look at So goods vehicles and motorcycles, they are disproportionately involved in collisions. So there's fewer of them, but they are, compared to the motor, they're more likely to be involved in a collision in which another road user is killed or seriously injured. And then for HGVs, this bottom one is people killed. So HGVs are really markedly disproportionately involved in in fatal collisions. So motorcycles are quite interesting. So if you if you want to ask questions about that later, I'm very happy to talk about it. But I won't go into it now unless somebody has a specific interest in that. This slide really is to show that we really take great care to sort of evaluate the impact of our interventions and see what difference it makes. And it really, and to really like reiterate the fact that what we're doing is really working. I mean, you can read the stats yourself, but I guess there's sort of three main points here, and there's three key success stories. Is first of all, what has really worked is to lower the speed limits across the city. So on our own roads, we have seen, we've lowered the speed limits and seen a 24% reduction in KSIs. And then on the borough roads, 21 of them, of the 33, are now 20 miles per hour. We've seen a 34% reduction in KSI. So that's really effective and really powerful. Second is the direct vision standard for HGVs and the safe systems. Safe system that has really that also has made a really enormous difference. So on average, we're seeing 6 fewer people killed in a collision with an HGV every year. So that is really, really, really impactful, and a 32% reduction in KSIs overall. And then lastly, our low traffic neighborhoods have also really helped in reducing road danger. We've seen a 37% reduction within the LTN themselves, and no increase on the boundary roads. It's important to stress because that's something that people are always asking about. So yeah, and this is really sort of to put this to bring us back to reality. So it has been, what we've done has really worked, and it's been a real success story, and we're really motivated by that. However, this is where we are now, and then you can see where we need to get to, and really we have a massive challenge ahead of us. And also important to stress, you know, this is a downward trend, but if we stop doing everything, it wouldn't just continue to go down. It would probably go up, because this is like our efforts are sort of in the face of really significant headwinds, including population growth, the change in vehicle design, and new technologies being introduced. So it's really it is really a massive effort, and that is really where the Vision Zero Action Plan 2 comes in, because we've taken a lot of time to in the publication or in the development of it, to go really through the statistics and work out what exactly does road danger look like in London, what makes the biggest difference, where can we, so what are the most impactful interventions we can do to try and get us to 2041 and zero. And I apologize, the slide is slightly crazy with all of the different colors. I don't know why it's like this, but this is the Vision Zero Action Plan is a really lengthy and kind of big document, very detailed, and I really recommend you reading it if you're interested. But this is sort of the plan on a page, a slight summary of like what our main priorities are. So and what we're trying to do. So first of all, we do know that higher vehicle speeds lead to more frequent and more severe collisions. So in the plan, we have a commitment to continue to roll out safer speed limits across the city, because we've seen that really works. But also with speed limits, it's not just setting the speed limits, also making sure that people stick to the speed limit. So because of that, we have quite sort of meaty enforcement actions in the plan. So first of all, we're going to renew and expand our safety camera network. And then second, we have an exploratory action in there to see what we can do to sort of increase enforcement in the city, and if there's ways of sort of boosting that. And then in terms of streets, safe streets, so we know that the sort of risk increases where you see motor vehicles mixing with people walking and cycling. And that's where you're seeing the problems. So we have got quite a lot of actions in there to try and sort of make that safer, and that is from trialing side road zebras to adding more pedestrian crossings, and then building on the school streets and low traffic neighborhoods. We will continue to roll them out, but also sort of thinking about evening streets and hospital zones, and a focus on high streets. So thinking about kind of corridors, how can we like make larger areas safer for people walking, cycling? Then the Metropolitan Police have a few actions in there to tackle the most risky behavior on the roads, including more dash cam and helmet reporting and tackling unregistered and uninsured vehicles and hit and run drivers. And then we want to support the risk in cycling, and we're doing that by sort of committing to further expanding our cycle network across the city, but also to address this issue of illegal e-bikes, which we're seeing, and then providing training and education to cyclists. And then another thing is like I mentioned about the headwinds, but like it's really important with road danger. It never kind of stays the same, and things change, and you have to respond to that. And that we're seeing that, for example, in the changing vehicle design, like car spreading. So we've got an action in there to look at what can we do to reduce the risk posed by oversized vehicles. And then also, like, we have massive changes coming as early as this year, probably, with the introduction of automated vehicles. So how do we make sure that we sort of reap the benefits from that, and it doesn't introduce a massive risk? And then lastly, we will talk more about this in the second part of the presentation. We've got a whole new area in there around driving and riding for work, and we think that's really important because about just under 50% of collisions in London are related to a working driver or rider. So yeah, that's the planner page. I mean, this is the sort of first part of the presentation. I don't know if you want to ask questions now and then we go into the second part, or if you want to jump straight into the second part.
I don't think we've got any questions in the Q&A at this point. Nick and Stephen have been having a quick chat in the chat, so maybe Hannah, when Stephen's presenting, you can have a look at that and add anything that's needed.
Okay.
I did just have one quick question on targets. In light of the government's new road safety strategy and their target to 2035, the 65% and then 70% for children, how has that changed your thinking, if at all, in terms of the London targets?
We have adopted it. We have added it in as well. So we had an interim target up to 2030 when we're keeping that. But then we've kind of adopted the same target just to kind of show, I guess, to welcome like this new target. We think that it's a really good thing that government has set a target, and to really show that we're working together with government on this, and that we have a shared ambition. So yeah, so it's an additional target now that we so we've got 2030, and then we've got 2035, and then we're going to 2041. So yeah.
Stuff. In which case, yeah, I reckon let's have a longer session for questions at the end once we've gone through this next session. Thanks.
Cool. All right. So this is I'm really excited about this. This is a piece of work we did on better understanding work-related road risk in London. And just to reiterate, this was part of our sort of data deep dive and understanding what road danger looks like when we were developing the Vision Zero action plan, of going, okay, what can we do to really sort of tackle this, and what interventions are most meaningful. And we really did spend a lot of time going, okay, who is being killed or seriously injured, where and when, and who are these people, and how does it all happen? And as part of that, we were really interested in journey purpose, particularly what proportion of people killed or seriously injured on London's roads are harmed in collisions involving somebody driving or riding for work. And there's like sort of various reasons why we were interested in this. So first of all, we are trying to shift people onto active travel modes, so walking, cycling, public transport, and to reduce reliance on private car trips. But for people driving for work, this shift is far less likely to happen. People will probably likely continue to rely on their cars for work or their vehicles, and it's sort of it is much harder to sort of find alternatives. So it's really, this is the proportion of traffic that is here to stay, or at least in some form here to stay. And not only that, because we're also anticipating that we will see a proportionate increase in people driving and riding for work as we're reducing private vehicle use. So it's really important that we understand that part of the traffic. And then and their involvement in KSIs. And then sort of second, we know that driving and riding for work carries additional risk factors. You have time pressure, you have people driving in potentially unfamiliar areas, you have increased vehicle wear and tear due to sort of high mileage. You've got issues such as fatigue, etc., and work equipment, and all of these things pose a risk. And then third is slightly more tactical, is actually we've got different levers for change here. So if you're thinking about behavior change, it's really difficult to like try and reach absolutely everybody who uses our road network and to sort of make sure they behave in a safe way. And so this offers an opportunity where we can potentially work with fewer people who will then sort of disseminate the messages and look after the workers. So working with a few sort of employing companies who will then sort of like, and the message will sort of trickle down. So it's a one-to-many kind of approach, which is potentially effective and efficient. So then what do we know about driving and riding for work? So we've got Stats 19, journey purpose. Journey is part of work. And that is, yeah. So if you look at Stats 19, it will tell you, if you like run it, and then it will tell you, okay, 27% of people killed or seriously injured in London were involved in a collision with at least one working driver. But the 27%, so that's about 1,000 people a year, which in itself is quite a lot. But we kind of also know that this is a massive underestimate because Stats 19 is really unreliable when it comes to journey purpose. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, you've got like really quite a lot of misclassification where officers getting it wrong when they're classifying the incidents. So for example, 4% of collisions involving HGVs were recorded as leisure journeys, and that is not true. So, and you think, okay, an HGV is obviously a vehicle that is used for work. So what does this misclassification look like for other vehicles? And it sort of gives you an idea of like how unreliable the records might be. And then second, we've got a huge number of unknown records. So 42% of records, we don't know the journey purpose. So we were kind of we looked at this and we were kind of left with, okay, this is a big problem, but how big of a problem is it and who's really affected? So we looked around and tried to find ways of improving the evidence base for this. And we came across an article published by UCL and Agilicis, who had sort of done quite a lot of work to address exactly this problem of misclassification. And what they did was they basically reclassified or jiggled around the Stats 19 data based on a less wrong principle. So they then said, okay, let's just assume that all bus and coaches or driver journeys in Stats 19 are part of work. They're never leisure journeys or commuting, they're just part of work. And that all heavy and medium goods vehicles, that all driver journeys are also just part of work, they're not anything else. And then for vans, let's acknowledge the fact that, people might use them for leisure journeys, but actually commuting journeys, let's just also classify them as journey as part of work, because a van is very unlikely to sort of go to the same workplace all the time, and they're much more used to sort of, for deliveries or traveling to different work sites, etc. And whereas this isn't perfect, then it gives you a less wrong picture of what it looks like. So so we really liked this approach and sort of applied it to the London data. And that then sort of bumped up the 27% to 30%. But what this approach didn't do, it didn't look at the large number of unknowns. And because of that, actually, it sort of left us a little bit in the dark still about almost half of the collisions, but also the smaller modes, which weren't really part of this. So we then looked at what we can do about this and developed a proportionate estimation method for these 42% of unknown records. And basically, what we did is we looked at the records per mode, at the records of where we did know journey purpose, at the proportion of those that were work-related, and then applied that same proportion to the unknown records, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I'm going to pass on to Stephen now, who's going to talk you through what we actually did.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm just going to go through the calculations. Nothing too complicated, hopefully. So basically, we looked at this a number of ways, but the main thing was we took all the vehicles from all the collisions where someone was killed or seriously injured in London between 2022 and 2024. We split them into two sort of groups. One was the casualty vehicles, and the other is the non-casualty vehicles, which some people call the collision partners. And we also split them by mode. Then for each of those, we calculated the percentages by journey purpose just for the vehicles that had a journey purpose, which was 58% of them. So it's quite a large sample of the whole data set. So for now, we were sort of ignoring the ones that didn't have a journey purpose. And then we applied the less wrong assumptions that Hannah mentioned, set out in Bruce Walton and UCL's earlier study. So, for instance, that it's safe to assume that all buses, coaches, large goods vehicles are being driven for work, or that it would be less wrong to assume that anyway than what is actually in the data. If you could go on to the next slide, Hannah. Yeah, keep going. So that essentially allowed us to extrapolate these percentages. So if we're saying that 25% of motorcyclists with a known journey purpose were traveling for work, then we can assume that 25% of all the motorcyclists in the data set were traveling for work. And this allowed us to create this probability matrix. So this matrix shown there on the screen, it's basically the chance that at least one of the vehicles in any collision was traveling for work. So for example, if you were to look at any row featuring bus or coach or HGV, then the row and the column would be all 100%. As part of this study, we assumed that all pedestrians were not traveling for work. So if you were to look at the pedestrian column or row, the percentages is only relating to the collision partner. So we then overlaid this probability matrix onto our vehicle involved table, which you might have seen on our road danger reduction dashboard on the TfL website. It's quite a standard vehicle involved table. We had to expand our existing one so that we showed the 3 different types of good vehicles, and we also included solo collisions. And by overlaying the probability matrix on top of it, it gave us the estimates for the number of people killed or seriously injured in collisions that involve someone driving or riding for work. And then we could then split this by mode and by worker or non-worker. So if you can just tap. So that's the vehicle involved matrix. That's a link to the dashboard below it. And then, so we also undertook, the overall result was for 2022 to 2024, we estimate that 46% of the people killed or seriously injured on London's roads were in collisions with someone that was driving or riding for work. Now, we did a number of variations of this methodology and sensitivity tests. So overall, we can say at a sort of 95% confidence level that the percentage is a 44.1% plus or minus 2.4%. And whilst obviously this is an estimation, but we are dealing with a sample size that is almost 60% of the whole data set. So it's not, should be quite robust. And we did also look at sample bias and to make sure that the ones that did have journey purpose were a fair representation of the full data set. And on to our findings. So if you go on to the next one. So, yeah. So as part of the study, we ran this sort of calculation for every individual year from 2017 to 2024, and This is shown in the top left-hand graph. Obviously, we're sort of excluding pandemic years for obvious reason, but what you can see is that the percentage, that's the bars, remain fairly steady over time. It is starting to pick up now, sort of post-pandemic, and we expect it to continue to rise as home deliveries continue to increase and the gig economy continues to grow. You'll also notice from the graph in the top right-hand corner that the vast majority of people killed or seriously injured in these work-related collisions are non-workers, or what we've termed members of the public, and they're mainly pedestrians, cyclists and motorcyclists. And then on to the next one, Hannah. So yeah, in terms of which modes are most involved in these collisions, it's predominantly cars, which is largely a function of their mode share, but also vans. And TfL's main focus these last few years has been on making buses and HGVs safer, particularly for those that they get in collisions with. But now we're going to be switching more to looking at how we can improve cars, particularly grey fleet cars and vans, in terms of making them safer for people that they might come into a collision with. So we estimate that cars being driven for work and being involved in collisions where someone's been killed or seriously injured has increased by about 50% from 2019 to 2025. And this is largely a result of the growth in the gig economy and the sort of last mile deliveries that occur nowadays using cars and vans and motorbikes. And finally, the next slide is just showing the workers that are killed or seriously injured on London's roads. And it's not surprising, but they are dominated by motorcyclists and pedocyclists. And then I'll pass back to Hannah to say what we're going to do about it.
Yes. So, I mean, this kind of shows like what a massive risk this really is, and like the extent of the problem really. And this slide really I wanted to put in just to sort of put it into context. So if DFT have run a similar sort of method to UCL, they haven't looked at the unknowns, but they're sort of reclassified stuff and the collisions based on the UCL principles. And they estimate that 29% of road fatalities in Great Britain involve a working driver or rider. Now, if you compare that to the stats published by the Health and Safety Executive, which sort of record fatalities from kind of all other work activities in the UK, it shows that you have twice as many fatalities from driving or riding for work than all other forms of work-related harm combined. So this is really, I think, a shocking statistic, really. And it makes you wonder why this is, because obviously driving and riding for work is a work activity and should, you'd think, oh, people should be protected, by the employers and risks should be mitigated. But really, and this is sort of, we looked at why this is and why we think this might be happening. And if you look at the health and safety legal and regulatory framework for driving and riding for work, it soon becomes apparent that it is far less specific and robust than it is for other work activities. So I'm comparing here driving and riding for work with manual handling. And I picked manual handling. I could have picked any other high-risk activity, including dealing with hazardous substances or working from height or whatever else. And this is really, sorry, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of this, but you have the Health and Safety at Work Act here at the top, which places a sort of very general duty of care on employers for their employees and others affected by their operations. But it's a very high level kind of legal document. And then underneath that, underneath the Health and Safety at Work Act, you have regulations that sort of go into a bit more detail about what that actually means and what that looks like. And you have the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, which is also reasonably high level. It basically requires employers to carry out risk assessments for their activities and to mitigate risks to a level that could be considered as low as reasonable practicable. And that applies to sort of all work activities. And this is then where it becomes interesting. So under the health and safety at work regulations, you then, for other work activities, high-risk work activities, you usually have more specific regulations that spell out what that actually means and what you should consider and how you should sort of mitigate risk for like specific hazards. So for manual handling, you have the manual handling regulations. You don't have any equivalent at all for driving and riding for work. There's just nothing there. It's like a general requirement to look to risk assess, but nothing more specific. And then under regulations, you then have approved codes of practice. They're not in themselves necessarily legal documents, but they carry kind of legal weight. So if you're taken to court, the courts will look at, have you done what it says in the ACOB? And if you haven't as an employer, then you kind of have to show that you've done something equally as good. So for manual handling, you have an ACOB, as you do for most other sort of high-risk activities or hazards, but you don't have that for driving and riding for work. So really what this is sort of showing is for driving and riding for work, it's a really high level requirement, but it doesn't actually tell employers what exactly to do and how they should mitigate this risk. And then second, you can see here under the manual handling regs, you have the reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrence regulations, WRRR. Now, there is a requirement for employers to report any kind of serious incident that falls within a certain category to a regulator. And the regulator not only then collates that data and has that data set to sort of inform policy, but also they then have the opportunity to decide if they want to investigate. And if they do investigate, they can put in place improvement notices, prohibition notices if they see failings in health and safety management. They can also prosecute under Health and Safety at Work Act. Now, driving and riding for work is not covered by WRRR. So there's no requirement on employers to report to a regulator if somebody is seriously hurt or gets killed in a collision. Instead, what happens is the police investigate as a road traffic sort of collision, and they focus on much more on the individual rather than on the underlying kind of management of health and safety that sit behind that driver. So really nobody looks at like how long has that driver been on the road for? Have they been working for 14 hours without a break? Have they had the necessary health checks, had an eye test, whatever it is? So nobody looks at the sort of systemic management behind it. There is sort of a loose kind of process of, okay, well, if the police suspect systemic failings, they can then report it to the health and safety executive, but that in reality just doesn't happen. And as a result, you have very little scrutiny for people managing work-related road risk, which sort of leads to a poor culture, really, where there isn't really clear expectation on what to do, and no one really looks at whether it's happening or not. And then finally, not finally, actually, second to last point, the gig economy in this framework is very, very interesting. This framework, like we just said, is already quite kind of loose and unspecific. But when it comes to the gig economy, it becomes even less robust, because in the gig economy, it's sort of, it doesn't follow the traditional employment model. So whereas employers have actually a duty of care towards employees, in the gig economy, platform companies are not employing people. They are tech companies. They're essentially apps just connecting couriers with customers, with product providers. They're just like kind of marketplaces. And couriers are self-employed. They bring their own vehicles. So in that case, the legal responsibility, the onus for managing the health and safety really sits with the individual couriers rather than with the platform companies, which you might argue is not very effective or efficient, because really they're in a really good place to set and monitor standards, but that is not really what the law requires at this point. So that's a massive problem. And then sort of finally, what is interesting is this is not part of a health and safety legal and regulatory framework. There are some requirements for professional drivers, especially of sort of larger vehicles, HGVs, etc. For example, they fall under the working time regulation directive. And they have to do some professional driving qualifications. However, these things are really inconsistent and patchy, and it's not entirely clear like why. So if we acknowledge the fact that an HGV driver might be fatigued if they're working too much, and that might cause a risk, it's not really quite understandable why that same logic then doesn't apply to a taxi driver or in fact a courier or whatever. So so there's really like sort of inconsistent requirements there as well. And all of this really leads itself to like a culture where it's not taken seriously and there's no clear expectation, and people, it's also a bit different to other work activities because lots of people also obviously drive for other reasons, etc. And it's just leading to a situation of like a general complacency, I'd say, in society. So then what are we going to do about it? Well, like I said, in the Vision Zero action plan, we have got a chapter on this now, and we've got some actions around this. So first of all, is to strengthen the evidence base. This is really something that has been flying under the radar for a really, really long time, just because the evidence is so bad. So our report and the work that Stephen has just talked you through, that is really the first step to try and get to a truer picture. But there's much more that we can do to really understand who is affected, which industries are most at risk, etc. What does that actually look like? So there's more work to be done. We can effectively kind of prioritize and work through how to address this risk. Then there is a big piece in there about advocating for legal reform. Like I just said, it's the health and safety legal and regulatory framework just isn't robust enough. And we welcome sort of the National Road Safety Strategy and the commitment to develop a voluntary work-related road risk charter, and we work with government on that. But fundamentally, we think a legal reform would probably be necessary to really turn this around. Then there's a piece around standards, best practice standards that have a place in this. So we've got the fleet operator recognition scheme, for example, and the clock standards, etc. So there's we've got an action in there to make sure that we've got standard and identified what good looks like for all industries and business models, etc. And to really promote these standards and to and get people to adopt best practice. So there's a big kind of culture piece in there. And then last, we've got a few actions in there around looking at vehicles or which are frequently used for work, such as vans. Is there something we can do to improve van safety and illegal e-bikes in the gig economy, etc. And yeah, and that is that. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people and take questions if people have any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Hannah and Stephen. I think that's a really nice overview of driving for work, analysis, policy, key considerations moving forward. So I thoroughly recommend, if you're sat here thinking you want to do some analysis on driving for work, or you want to think about this a bit more as a policy area, please do kind of chat to these guys or use the work that they've put together. Right, I'm going to take chair's privilege to ask a question, and then we'll jump into some of the questions in the chat and things. So if I'm sat here maybe from a local authority and I'm thinking, I'd love to do this kind of analysis, I think that'd be really helpful. Are there any key recommendations that you'd have for someone doing that based on data requirements, challenges you've had with the analysis, that kind of thing?
Stephen, do you want to take this?
I'm trying to think of this. Obviously, as we mentioned, there are limitations with Stats 19. You need to really sort of apply some logic that will make more sense than some of the results you might get out of Stats 19 in terms, particularly regarding journey purpose. I mean, I think London is luckier than most in terms of how well it's filled in, from what I gather from the DFT. So just being aware of that, and I'm happy to speak to anyone who is interested in undertaking such a study and showing them sort of how we did it in more detail, if that would be helpful.
I've also just put the report in the chat, which outlines exactly what we did. So that might also be a good starting point. But yeah, reiterate what Stephen just said. We're very happy to talk people through it if they wanted to do something similar. I think it would be really good if people did, if we sort of tried to build up like even an urban picture. Is this the same in other cities, etc., which would be really helpful.
Great. Question in the chat from Harish, who says, this is probably for you, Hannah. Are there any measures related to mobile phone usage while driving, i.e. cameras and fines? I guess this is in your new action plan.
Yeah, it's in the new action plan. It falls under safe behaviors, and there's some actions in there for the Metropolitan Police to address these things. So I'm going to put the action plan actually in the chat, so so you can have a look at it. It has a lot of information in there. So, but yes, that is covered in it. Hang on.
So Matt, we saw early 2025 figures are showing sort of a big, an increase in distraction in the vehicle as a contributory factor for particularly car occupant KSIs. And although mobile phone is separate, I think this is more like people using apps and stuff to, like delivery drivers trying to find out where they need to go and things like that, rather than people actually speaking on the phone.
Interesting. Okay, Nick, I can see you've got your hand up. I'll allow your camera and allow Mike, because I'm guessing you want to ask a question. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Agreeing to reveal myself. Yeah. Hi. Yeah, Nick here from F153. I don't think I can share, but I asked the question about the cycling rate. Now we kind of know, we can see with our own eyes as we walk around London streets that cycling has increased massively with Lime bikes, etc. Other brands are available, but what we do for national highways with Agilysys nationally, and obviously we've got the advantage of DFT traffic counts, and we've got the advantage of NTIS traffic counts, but we actually are able to show the KSI rate per billion vehicle miles. And I asked a question about that, and I've now combed through the report, but I can't see the equivalent to that. And I really appreciate that it's a very, very difficult number to get at, but I think it's critical. We all perceive the increase in cycling, but has the KSI rate really increased if we tie it to the number of billion cycle miles or whatever?
So the way we do risk rates in TfL is mainly with journeys as the denominator, and that's because that's all our own data that we're using. And I mean, in terms of measuring against the baseline, we've seen a big drop in risk as we've seen this big increase in cycling. One thing that you're going to see with the provisional 2025 figures that came out very recently and the finalized figures that will come out later this year is that KSI risk for cyclists did increase this in 2025 compared to 2024. It's still well below the baseline, but we think that is due to this big explosion in particularly e-bikes being available to hire on the roads. And then people who do hire them, they're not wearing helmets, whereas your traditional commuter would be wearing a helmet and riding their own bike. We do look also at the DFT vehicle kilometers and mileage data, but my colleagues in a different part of TfL are not particularly happy to use them. So we generally stick to the journey stage numbers.
Understood. Thank you.
Great.
But just to like reiterate, like it's been that it's like 2024 shown a 23% reduction in risk overall. So that is, they are getting markedly safer over time. So yeah.
Fatalities has dropped massively. But yeah, serious injuries did pick up a bit last year.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Hannah, I sensed when you got to the motorcyclist bit earlier, I sensed you were keen to elaborate on some of that. And I noticed with the stats that obviously there's quite high numbers of motorcyclists in one of the last slides you presented. So yeah, do you want to elaborate on motorcyclists, plans there, numbers there, etc.?
Yeah, motorcyclists are really interesting because actually we've seen motorcyclists are and traditionally have been the highest risk mode on the roads. I think it was a 2024, I think it's 22% of the KSIs, but 4% of the vehicle mileage from memory. And that has consistently been the case. But what was really interesting about motorcycling is that we've seen a massive reduction in KSIs over the years. I think, Stephen, am I right? I think it's like almost 50% reduction over the years, which is really interesting. But what's also interesting about motorcycling in London is that we're seeing like different way people motorcycling, a shift in how people use motorcycles, which is really interesting. So whereas maybe traditionally people had bigger bikes and were using them for commuting, etc. We're now seeing many more little motorbikes of 125cc or below, used in the gig economy, used for work. And it's really important also to stress that while we've seen a massive decrease in motorcycle KSIs, we've seen a slight increase in motorcycle KSIs with journey as part of work. So that it suggests that people are now really, that is the main kind of reason why people use works, is to deliver food in the gig economy, basically, which is really, really interesting. And in terms of like stats, you can kind of break it down. You have like the bigger bikes, which are above 125cc, and the smaller bikes below 125cc, which you can ride on CBT. And the smaller bikes, about 60% of those are involved in KSIs, but there's many more of them, whereas the bigger bikes, you're seeing them, I think about 60% of them are involved in fatalities. So the bigger bikes are higher risk of fatalities and the sort of use commuting faster roads, etc. And then you have the smaller bikes used busy high streets, etc., and involved in less serious collisions, but increasingly popular among gig economy riders. So it's really important also to think about like what can we do about that. So this is like this issue about CBT that's been flying around for ages. We don't think that is fit for purpose. We really welcome a review of the motorcycle licensing, including introducing a theory test for people who are riding motorcycles. Etc. But yeah, it's been a real kind of that has really seen a massive change, which is interesting, and it's very urban picture as well, because motorcycles are a headache for many people in some ways in road safety, but the urban and the rural pictures are completely different bikes, different demographics, etc., which makes it quite complex but interesting.
Yes. So this graph is just showing sort of the risk of a motorcyclist being killed or seriously injured over time. And as Hannah said, sort of pre-pandemic, we had quite a lot of people using big bikes, commuting to work, and using the big roads, going at higher speeds. And when they're involved in a collision, much more likely to be killed or seriously injured. Post-pandemic, we've seen a big shift. We've seen a lot less of these commuters on big bikes. We've seen a lot more of the people on small bikes doing deliveries and stuff, going at lower speeds on more sort of congested residential roads. And so they tend to get less injured when they are in a collision than those going on big bikes at high speed. So as well as obviously we've been trying to push safety on motorcycles, but a large bit of this dip, particularly post-pandemic, has been from that shift in usage.
Very interesting. Yeah, I feel like we could have a whole session on the data. Last question then in the chat. So we're seeing a number of delivery drivers pressurized to deliver things in an unrealistic time frame, pushing them to take risks or aggressive driving. Have you got any measures included in the strategy relating to that side of things?
Yeah, this is a big problem. This is the issue around the gig economy and this new business model. which is in many ways really is a completely new challenge, and this has obviously got to do with the fact that these platform companies, they are very flexible. So people are self-employed, people log on, they do as many or as few deliveries as they like, they get paid per drop, etc. And you can kind of see how that pay structure lends itself to or incentivizes maybe people to speed and to do as many deliveries in a shorter time as possible. There is genuinely, as a transport authority, there's nothing we can do about that business model. We have no powers to regulate the industry or to change that. That is what it is. But like I said, there's like a big piece in there in the work-related workers thing about advocating for legal change, where we think it would be really helpful to sort of shift the legal accountability for safety more towards platform companies and away from individual careers, and that would include speeding. We are, aside from that, we are actively engaging with the food delivery companies. Maybe some of you will have seen, but we published a motorcycle delivery company road safety charter back in 2023, which sort of addresses this. This is a sort of voluntary charter. It's got 10 really high-level road safety principles in there, and this issue around realistic delivery times is in there and is covered, and the companies have committed to that. As part of the charter, we are we've sort of coupled the charter signage. The charter was signed by the main food delivery industry companies, I'd like to say, and as part of the charter, we sort of agreed with them that they would attend a 6-monthly road safety forum, which we hold every 6 months, and we are actively engaging with the companies on safety. So it's not something that it's something that is on our radar and that we're actively working on, but can we change it ourselves? Probably not, but we're definitely using our power of influence to address it as good as or as best as we can. I can put the charter in the chat as well, so you can have a look at that.
Yes, please, that would be great. All right, we've got 2 minutes left. There's one last question that was just snuck in, a really good question actually, around challenges to the assumptions you've made in terms of this less wrong aspect. For example, going from 0% to 100% type absolutes could be considered manipulating data to support a predetermined objective of higher regulation, for example. Any comments on that one?
So we haven't changed the data that much, and the only areas where we have are bus coach drivers, HGV drivers, and medium-sized goods vehicle drivers. So they're the ones that we've put to 100% driving for work. If anyone knows of any HGV drivers or bus drivers that are not driving for work and using their bus or HGV to go shopping, please let me know. We just think that it would be less wrong to go with something that's not 100% in most cases than it would be to go with 100%. One of the big reasons why the police sometimes get things wrong is that they put in the journey purpose of the person that was injured rather than the driver of the vehicle. So, for instance, a bus passenger who gets injured in a collision involving a bus, the police officer might ask for the casualty what their journey purpose was and record that, rather than the actual bus driver who was obviously driving for work. I mean, yeah, it was all set out in this paper by UCL and Bruce Walton, and we're not manipulating the data very much, and we feel that this tweaking that we are doing around the edges is actually making it better than it would have been otherwise.
Cool. All right, that's 12 o'clock. Thank you very much, Hannah and Stephen, for coming to present that to us. I got a sneak peek of this a couple of months ago when we were at the same conference together, but now we've got a recording of it, so we've got it on record. So anyone that wants to refer back to this work on driving for work, please do access the recording. I'm sure you guys will be happy for people to get in touch if they want to do similar kinds of analysis as well. Great. Okay. Thank you for coming. Stay safe out there and see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.